Time now to take a look at what's grabbing headlines around the world. Florence Filipino back on the set. Our top story, what's happening in Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa to be sworn in any moment now, replacing Robert Mugabe.
It's a big story in Zimbabwe, as you can imagine. Let's take a look at News Daily, which is an independent paper that says that his task is unenviable. Essentially, his inauguration comes at a time when Zimbabweans are at a crossroads. He inherits a tattered economy, a divided ruling party, and a population that has extremely high hopes for a quick economic and political turnaround strategy. Our country is broken, says News Daily, which, keep in mind, was actually quite critical of Robert Mugabe. News Daily says that now is the time to map out a vision so that we can look into a brighter future in which Zimbabwe will rise again from the ashes.
And a lot of papers still focusing on Robert Mugabe and his downfall and giving some attention to his wife, Grace.
Did Grace Mugabe cause Robert Mugabe's downfall? Well, that's certainly what a lot of political commentators have been saying. You can read about it here in Jeune Afrique. It was her thirst for power that caused the old guard to revolt. That's what a lot of papers are saying. They couldn't stand the idea that Gucci Grace, as she was called, a secretary who became first lady, they couldn't stand the fact that she was going to take away their cushy privileges. And Jeune Afrique points out that it's not the first time that people have laid the blame on an African leader's wife for their political downfall. You can see some other examples here. Simone Gbagbo, Leila Tremblay, they say they're perhaps the ones that were responsible for their fatal political careers for their husband. Of course, it had nothing to do with their husbands at all.
All right, well, moving on to another top story today. Burma and Bangladesh have signed a deal for Rohingya refugees to return to their homes in Burma's Rakhine state, but the details are scarce thus far.
The details are scarce, and you can take a look at the Myanmar Times. So that's a Burmese paper. It's a state-owned paper in English. You can see a photo there of Bangladesh's foreign minister shaking hands with Burma's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. This refugee deal is linked repatriation to begin. When? That's the real question. Well, the Myanmar Times says it's going to happen soon, soon being very vague, of course. This has some details as to what might happen. Application forms will be sent to Bangladesh for the refugees to fill up with their personal details, and those forms will be sent back to Myanmar for, Burma, for verification. All that could take time. If we take a look at the Daily Star, which is a Bangladeshi paper, you can see they want it to happen immediately. In fact, this is what Bangladesh's Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, said, and they're hoping that things will move along quickly.
And meanwhile, Pope Francis traveling to Burma and Bangladesh this weekend, a trip that might be tricky.
The Daily Beast says that he is embarking on one of the most delicate political dances of his tenure. Now, the potential pitfalls of this trip are being compared to his predecessor, Pope Benedict, who in 2006 made some pretty controversial comments about Islam that led to outrage in the Muslim world, the murder of a Catholic nun and the destruction of several churches. So you can see this piece in the Daily Beast here, wondering, can Pope Francis save the Rohingya Muslims without killing any Christians? It's his most dangerous trip ever.
And moving on to another story, papers are focusing on an alliance between Russia, Iran, and Turkey to try and find a solution to the Syrian crisis.
It's a big story in Russia. Let's take a look at an article in Nezavissimaya Gazeta, which is focusing on this summit that took place in Sochi. Of course, it was organized by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Quite a bold diplomatic move where he brought together, you can see Hassan Rouhani there, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, to draw up this plan for a peace plan, well, a move for a peace plan, a move that clearly sidelined the United States and the European Union. According to this Russian paper, it's very clear now that the future of Syria, a post-war Syria, that future is now in the hands of essentially Moscow.
Right, and some papers focusing on the fact that Syria sideline in that summit as well.
It's right. If we take a look at Al Arabi Al Jadid, that's a Qatari paper, they're critical of Russia, Iran, and Turkey for looking for a solution that doesn't involve Syria. All the regional powers are trying to find a solution, and the Syrian population is essentially being held hostage in these negotiations. The Russian president, according to this paper, is the one that's really pulling the strings here. He supported the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, so it's not really a mystery as to what's going to happen next. The last thing that these powers care about is Syrians, according to Al Arabi Al Jadid, and what they were hoping to achieve when the revolution started 6 years ago.
And finally, actress Uma Thurman has spoken out about the fallout of Harvey Weinstein's scandal in the U.S. after some suggestions that she might speak earlier.
You might remember back in October, she said she was too angry to speak. She, of course, worked on several films with Harvey Weinstein, including Pulp Fiction and the Kill Bill movies. Now, she broke her silence with this post on Instagram, where she said, I was angry recently, and I have a few reasons. #MeToo, in case you couldn't tell. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, except for you, Harvey. And she goes on to essentially say that she's taking pleasure in his downfall. I'm glad it's going slowly. You don't deserve a bullet.
All right. Thank you, Flo. Florence Viluna with a roundup of the international headlines. That's the news for now, but stick around. More headlines coming up in just a moment.